Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome. Welcome to the National Endowment for Democracy. I'm Damon Wilson, the president and CEO here. Apologies for those online in the room. We're starting a few minutes late, but this is a book that is well worth the wait. So I want to start just by, sounds a little bit discordant, but I want to start with a quote from Maya Angelou. She said, "I have great respect for the past. If you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going." This is the power of the book that Mikhail Zygar has done. If you don't understand the past, if you don't have a true understanding of your history, or you have a perhaps manipulated, warped understanding of your history, you're on a weak foundation for building the future. And so this conversation today, this book today, is not just another book about topical issues around the world. It's about helping fellow Russians, by a Russian, lay the foundation of an understanding of history, understanding of a past, so that there is an opportunity to build a stronger foundation for the future. This discussion is centered around Mikhail Zygar's haunting and timely book, War and Punishment. And we're really glad to have the opportunity to host Mikhail here. We're really grateful to my friend and colleague, Fiona Hill, for joining us to lead this conversation. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has brought a new attention to the country's imperialist legacy and its impact on the country's politics and society. This is really the first book by a Russian author written with the specific aim of debunking the historical myths that have been used over the centuries to oppress Ukraine and interrogating the Kremlin's current justifications for its brutal war for both Russian and Western audiences. It makes a significant contribution to ongoing conversations about the legacy of empire and the importance of coming to terms with the past for a democratic future. And these conversations need to take various forms. Some must be led by formerly colonized peoples inside and outside of modern Russia. But for a true break away from imperialist ideology and Russian politics, those conversations must also happen among Russians themselves. Mikhail is already a best-selling nonfiction author in Russia and someone with the standing to open meaningful debates within Russian society. He has long seen the need for Russian society to re-examine its own history as a first step toward democratic renewal, as well as the interest of young Russians in exploring alternate perspectives from the ones they encountered in their increasingly propagandistic textbooks. In November 2016, Mikhail launched Project 1917. It's a remarkable project leading a team of over 40 historians, journalists, and screenwriters and integrating thousands of archival materials to publish an interactive social media timeline where users could experience the history of the Russian Revolution in real time exactly 1 century later. And Project 1917 showed both the creativity and the diligence that Mikhail brings to the task of telling Russian history through an honest, critical lens. And this book reflects the same keen eye. The Russian version of this book has also been published by a new publishing house launched by the team from the media outlet Meduza. Many of you are familiar with them, of course. And it's already available in print for Russian audiences outside of Russia. And as of next month, it will be available via ebook to Russian audiences everywhere. It's an important first step towards having these conversations. This is also a crucial time for Russians to wrestle with these questions, as we'll hear from you. Russia's international aggression is always linked to what happens domestically. Domestic repression is what fuels this international aggression. The period since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine has seen a sharp crackdown on freedom of expression in Russia, and one that continues to intensify is with the current move to apply the legal designation of extremist organization to the vaguely fine international LGBT movement, which would expose LGBT people and organizations across Russia to potential criminal charges for any expression of their identity. And the Russian public is by no means united behind the direction their government has taken, either internationally or domestically, over the last few years. At presidential elections next March, the government's going to be under pressure to deliver results showing overwhelming support for Putin as he goes into a 5th presidential term. Unpopular measures, such as a second wave of general mobilization in support of the war, are being planned for implementation after the election. So this is an important moment for Russians to reflect on their country's direction, and this book will doubtless do much to prompt such a reflection. But its relevance is much broader. It's a valuable resource for anyone trying to understand Russia's war on Ukraine, understanding the imperialistic roots of Russia's motivations and mentality toward Ukraine is crucial for formulating policy that can successfully achieve a just and durable peace for Ukraine. This book is an outstanding guide to the Putin regime's thinking, offering both deep historical research on Ukrainian-Russian relations as well as granular insider reporting on the regime's decision-making in the months leading up to February 22. We're going to turn this over to Mikhail and Fiona for this conversation, but as part of this background, part of what we've seen of this repression, I just want to call out our colleague Alsu Karmasheva, a Russian-American journalist who's being held in Kazan by Russian authorities in pretrial detention as part of this crackdown. A U.S. and Russian citizen, a reporter for RFERL. It's part of so many of our colleagues, our friends. I see Natalia Arnaud with us, many who are facing this type of repression at home. And hopefully the conversation that you prompt is part of a process of consideration, examination, and ultimately healing. So we're going to turn to Dr. Fiona Hill. She's one of the world's leading experts on Russian politics and the Putin regime, a senior fellow at the Center on the United States and Europe at the Brookings Institution. She has been a remarkable follower of all things Russian politics. She served as Deputy Assistant to the President, Senior Director for Russian and European Affairs at the NSC, as well as on the National Intelligence as a National Intelligence Officer for Russia and Eurasia at the National Intelligence Council. So Fiona, welcome. Mikhail, welcome. Let me invite you to the stage to begin the conversation. It's an honor to have you here at the Endowment. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Fiona.
So have you got your mic
Yes, I think so.
I'm not sure if I've got mine. Oh, is that working?
Yeah.
It's always good when you see the green button. Well, Damon, obviously this is a wonderful opportunity for me as well as everyone else here to have a chance to meet with Mikhail. And this is, for those of you who haven't read it yet, a pretty remarkable book. In fact, I spent a little bit of time over the last couple of days rereading some of my favorite sections of this because it's very individualistic. It's very much reflective of work that you've done before. I'm a huge fan of your many previous works, especially All the Kremlin's Men, which was an incredible in-depth insight into all the activity around Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin. And I think one of the questions that I would like to get us started with is, I mean, Damon already referenced the 1917 project and the group of people that you brought together to have a real-time look at Russian history. But why was it so important for you to specifically write this book based on everything else that you've been doing? You and I had a conversation about this in Germany where you told me a little bit about this, but I think it would be also important for the rest of the audience to understand why you specifically wanted to write this book, not just because of obviously the huge events around Russia and Ukraine, but you told me that it was personally very important for you, and I'd like you to share with everybody else why that's the case.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yes, it was a personal book because I think that actually I started writing this book well before the full-scale aggression of Ukraine. I was traveling a lot. I was working a lot in Ukraine. I spent several months traveling across Ukraine in 2021, and that was the moment when I first met President Zelensky, and I started working on a book about Ukraine as the new phenomena, an important political phenomena for post-Soviet territories, countries. But everything changed for me, obviously, as for everyone on February 24th. And I realized that I have to write completely different book. And it won't be the book about Ukraine, but it will be the book about Russia. Because I understood that we overlooked huge danger that was obviously visible. The idea of Russian Empire as the biggest threat to to the peoples of former Russian Empire, as a bigger threat to Ukrainians, Belarusians, other peoples to the Russian people, it has always been neglected. Unfortunately, Russian society, Russian intellectuals, Russian authors have never started that conversation. We have never started intellectual process of rethinking of Russian Empire. The conversation that has started in the United Kingdom 100 years ago, when Kipling, the famous author of Jungle Book, has become one of the he has never been cancelled, but he was not considered as the decent political thinker for his white man's burden, and that conversation started in Britain 100 years ago. Different former empires tried to manage with its imperial past, with its legacy, and how they deal with their history and how they project their history to their contemporary policies. But Russia has never started that conversation. Russian intellectuals, even after 1991, when there was a chance to start analysis of our past, unfortunately, most Russian historians were focused on the crimes of Bolshevism, crimes of Stalin, Lenin, but broader idea of Russian imperialism has never been touched upon. It was inappropriate for Russian historian, for Russian author, to call Russian Empire a colonial empire, because any historian would start arguing that no, colonies are something beyond the ocean.
Right.
It's like British Empire had colonies, and Siberia is an integral, or any other part of Soviet Union, of Russia, has always been an integral part of Mother Russia. And I think that problem has been overlooked, and I considered it to be my personal guilt, because as an author, I turned blind eye to that important issue, and that's why I had to write this book about. I call it the detective story through the eyes of the murderer. It's the story of how Russia was oppressing Ukraine since 17th century, and but instead we don't know that history. Unfortunately, we have a bunch of historical myths created by official mainstream historians who seem to be some kind of historical propagandists who created that official imperial historical narrative of Russian Empire. And it's still being taught in most universities of the world. As well, it's still the only historical narrative taught in Russia. And a lot of Russians believe in that historical narrative, and they believe in all those historical myths. And when President Putin, during the recent Valdai Forum, was saying that Russia has never invaded anyone, we were only helping. They wanted our help, and so we offered our help. A lot of people truly believe that, and so I think I felt my personal responsibility to write this book and to start this conversation.
Well, I think you've touched on, and I'm sure the audience would agree here, a number of very important points. And in the perspective of sitting here in Washington, D.C., and, kind of thinking about this from the National Endowment for Democracy's more global perspective, I mean, this debate that you're touching upon and this inquiry, is very common to a number of states, if we think about this in a comparative perspective as well. I mean, here in the United States, there's also a battle for history. We're also, I think, having a hard time recognizing the United States as an empire. There are some overseas colonies. Hawaii comes immediately to mind, previously a British colony, and obviously very much overseas, pretty far to get to Hawaii. Also, the acquisition of territory in Alaska from Russia. Russia, we have to remember, actually did have some overseas colonies across the Bering Sea in Alaska, and in fact, Russian explorers reached all the way down to California. We think about Fort Ross in California, for example, as being a Russian outpost up until the 1820s. And we're having a debate now, given what's happening in the Middle East, about the role of European colonialism. I mean, many people are aware, and we don't want to get into that today, but the framing of the current conflict as to, the influence of European colonialism. And a debate, as you were touching upon in the United Kingdom, about coming to terms with that colonial legacy, which is certainly not complete by any means. But I think, part of the issue that you touched upon is this debate about contiguous territorial empires. And it's not just Russia, of course. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, Austrians see themselves as very much the victims of World War II, don't see themselves as having been an empire because it was all territorial acquisition, or they actually were sharing that territory with Hungary. The Turks, the Ottoman Empire, also seeing itself in a very different, Erdogan obviously hasn't gone through the same, kinds of debates. As I said, the United States, thinking about the, the expansion of the United States, purchase of land, basically conquest of the Native Americans. And in the UK, it still remains an empire in its own contiguous territories. The first colonies were, in fact, the Welsh and then the Irish. The Scots is a little bit more complicated. So we're basically in a larger European context here, which I think is contentious. And it actually will probably make this quest of yours somewhat difficult, because a lot of other European countries have not really come to terms with how to debate the territorial empire and expansion and colonies itself. I mean, one of the issues right now, which, I'm wondering about, how you will handle this as you move forward, because you've said that you want to write more about this, is the idea that Russia now leads, in many respects, the kind of anti-colonial, vanguard of the national liberation, because it never did have overseas colonies. And that is kind of part of the debate, right now about Ukraine. But this is not an imperial or colonial conquest, because, this was all Russian territory. And Russia is seen differently in the rest of the world because it didn't have overseas colonies, not for want of trying, of course, because there was the Russo-Japanese War and the attempts to take over the Korean Peninsula and other expansions. But I mean, how are you going to debate this or look at this moving forward, given this complexity and the very contentious nature of this debate, right now in a global sense?
Yeah, it's really very interesting that, specifically I felt that the conversation is becoming more fascinating since the moment when I read the last Nikolai Patrushev's article called "Collapse of Parasite States." Right. That was exactly about this topic. Russia is a leader of the anti-colonialism movement in the world, and the Western states are parasites who are still trying to exploit and suppress the rest of the world. They used to do it with help of West Indies company. Now they're doing it with Amazon, Meta, and new colonialist companies, and it's really interesting. But anyway, this conversation has already been started, and we see that it's really hard. It's really hard to digest that kind of dialogue for many societies. I get a lot of questions on my social media. Okay, are you going to dismantle the myths about American empire as well? And yes, I've got the answer. No, I'm not going to do that, because there are brilliant American historians who are supposed to do that. And yes, it's a hard debate, but at least I was really inspired by the Museum of African American History, very close to us here, and it is the beautiful example of how different historical narratives could be created. And there is a lot of work being done in this country to create non-mainstream, not classical historical narratives, to add the voices of underrepresented people and to see the history through their eyes. And it's like we need that work in Russia. We know that a lot of peoples of Russia need their history, but actually we have that problem in Russia compared to other empires, because Russian history is specifically emperor-oriented.
Yeah.
We don't have, like, back in the beginning of 19th century, Nikolai Karamzin was widely criticized by his compatriots because of the name of his work. The history of Russian state was very criticized because his colleagues told him that actually it should be history of Russian people. Mm-hmm. And his colleague Polivoy wrote the history of Russian people counter Karamzin's work. But actually even this was wrong, because we need history of Russian peoples at least. Because yes, the peoples who used to live in Russian Empire have different historical perspectives. And the idea of, now it's becoming funny when Vladimir Putin tries to recall Alexander Nevsky and his relationships to the Horde, but actually idea of the Golden Horde as all those peoples lived on the territory of today's Russian Federation. Right. The capital of Golden Horde is located not far from city of Astrakhan. So it's so ridiculous that traditional Russian traditional version of Russian history shows that Russians were good and Tatars were bad. Mm-hmm. So how come we can have that kind of history when Tatarstan and Tatar people live in Russia? So yes, I think this kind of conversation is going to be started. We need to include. It's going to be started in Russia by Russians. Mm-hmm. It needs to be started in other countries by their historians. As you know, I spent several year and a half actually in Berlin, and I was talking extensively to German historians, to German authors about their experience of denazification after the World War II. And I don't know if it's precise and accurate, but the legend has it that the process of denazification in 40s and 50s was not successful, but only after the American series named Holocaust, mm-hmm. with Meryl Streep, that conversation has become widespread. The dialogue in Germany about Holocaust was a taboo for the generations who witnessed the war, and only the first generation that was born after the war was free enough to discuss it, and that's why the real dialogue about the war, about Nazism, about concentration camps, and about Holocaust started in Germany in the 70s. So I guess that's my perspective. I hope that in 25 years after the end of this war against Ukraine, there is going to be the new generation of Russians who will be free enough to accept that conversation.
Well, you've touched on some important ways of thinking about history. I think really what your book gets to the bottom of is who has the right to write history, because Putin is basically saying only the state. And if we think back to the Soviet period and earlier points after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, history was always approached very top-down. I mean, we have the many people, I mean, here I've worked with in the past, looking at the, ethnography and, the different ethnic groups of Russia, and looking at their perspectives through the Academy of Sciences and museums and literature, for example. But certainly over the last 2 decades, Putin has basically, with his own interest in history, put the kibosh on others, basically trying to have a more grassroots approach to telling their stories. What I think is really remarkable about what you've tried to do in the book is to put it into sort of a first-person dialogue right from the beginning and in sort of a real time, which is, of course, your hallmark of much of the other work that you've done, which makes it very real. And you're bringing out individuals, not just leaders, and individual stories, beginning at the very outset of the book with the priest Innocenty and his perspective and how he came, in a way to sort of set the tone. So I guess as we're kind of looking forward and thinking about the work that you've done with Dost, with Medusa, and the kind of approach now to writing, bring out these first-person stories. How do you hope to bring together these different voices, particularly at a time when there is just incredible repression and again, legal prohibitions against people talking about their version of history and how they perceive history and living history, when it's Vladimir Putin's version of history that is defining the present as well as the Russia future? What are kind of other creative ways beyond this book that we can start thinking about bringing out these stories and about how people see their own role in this history?
I would say even more. There is a well-known principle that the history is written by the winners,
right.
And I have always thought that the losers have the right for being included in the history. They have the right to be part of the history as well. So when I was creating the 1917 project, it was very important for me to bring losers back. Like we have Leninist version of the Russian Revolution or pre-revolutionary Russia, and like Mensheviks or socialist revolutionaries or other parts of Russian society have always been excluded from that Russian history. It was Nicholas II and then Lenin. So I really cared about all those people to be brought back, because any historical narrative, any scenario of our past is in a way that's the model of our society today. And if Russian society today doesn't have its own history, only President Putin has the history of his predecessors. We don't have the history of ours. So I think I'm sure that Russian society has changed a lot to understand the necessity of their own history. And I do believe that Russian society has changed and it needs that kind of history. I do believe that we have a lot of new projects, new popular historical projects in Russia about personal stories, about personal histories. We see that demand. We see, at least we have seen it during the last years, although it was very against the official narrative. Mm-hmm. I was trying to analyze retrospectively the official policy about the history, and I understand it perfectly well that it started approximately in 2012, mm-hmm. and the glorification of Russian army and Russian victories, it has been everywhere, and I don't know why I didn't see it. I have been in Moscow next to the central Lenin's library, yeah. on Pashkov House, and there was a huge mural with Alexander Nevsky and Dmitry Donskoy, huge mural just opposite Kremlin, and why it was there? Who created it? What was the purpose? And I have seen eternal posters with some Russian generals from the past on every bus stop for many years. So it was there. It was Medinsky's main objective as the Minister of Culture, the militarization of Russian history and Russian culture. And even though we had that historical narrative, we obviously saw the demand for other type of history, because I deeply believe that that type of patriotism and the need to have national pride is always a painkiller for the society. Like, people need to be proud of their country, their empire, only if they don't have anything else to be proud of. Mm-hmm. If they are not successful, if they don't have a job, or good job, if they're not happy with their job, if they're not happy with their family, with their apartment, with their dog, kids, anything, they have the country. And I really believe that during the last years, Russian society has changed a lot. for the first time ever in Russian history, we have bourgeoisie. We have a lot of people who really enjoy their life, who really don't need that painkiller. There is another issue that the fact that they have a lot to lose makes them very silent, stops them from speaking out, because they do not want to lose their comfort and their lifestyle. They cannot protest against war. They prefer to pretend, a lot of people, not everyone, but some people prefer to keep what they've got and not to speak out. But naturally, a lot of people in Russia, as Russian middle class, there is the demand for the social history, for the history, for everyday history. So I think that's anyway will be needed and will be popular in Russia, and I do hope that we'll find a way to distribute this book as well.
Yeah. Well, before bringing in all the audience and others who I know are very interested in this topic, I mean, in the course of the book itself, beyond the project and the effort that you're really trying to get underway here, you basically address some very interesting inflection points in the whole evolution of Vladimir Putin thinking about history. You just mentioned 2012 and yourself, not noticing, which is, of course, just after he comes back to the presidency, after his, brief tenure as prime minister, and heads off onto the path that we've seen over the last decade. That you see that as a kind of a pivotal moment in the way that history is displayed, as you said, in these manifestations of these huge posters and murals and statues coming up everywhere. And if we think about this in the kind of the sweep of time since the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the establishment of a separate Russia in the 1990s, looking back to the Yeltsin era, there was an effort briefly under Yeltsin. He set up a task force under Georgy Sitarov that some of you will remember here in the audience, looking for a new Russian idea, and lots of books were written. Many of us wrote dissertations about this back at the time, myself included, kind of wondering where this was all headed, and kind of gave up on this whole idea of how to create a kind of a synthetic Russian idea or a kind of a new Russian history, at least by the end of the 1990s. And Putin, as an amateur historian, has proven to be, much more of a student of that period of the 1990s than one might have expected. He is the person who's tried to create this synthetic history, this new Russian idea, wanting as it may be. But you said in the book that you see a number of key influences on him that are very personal. I mean, in many respects, this is really a personal history of Vladimir Putin that we're all living through. And I wonder, for those who haven't read the book, if you could go through that. I've found that really fascinating, about when you talk about these influences that go back to, basically Putin's own young adulthood, his connections with the Kovalchuks and others who really shaped his views of Russian history and of Ukraine itself. I mean, I think your own unprecedented access to people around the Kremlin and to the people who know Putin really helps to provide some insight here. And I think it would be very interesting for people to hear a little more about these pivot points and inflection points and the people who've shaped Putin's view. Yeah,
sure. I wanted to add one thought about the 90s. I think, yes, it was very important to create and to discuss any kind of national idea in 90s, but it was very important to practice what they used to preach, because if American founding fathers were only speaking about the ideas but would never have followed them, if George Washington was trying to be re-elected even when he was dying in the White House, it would be, he was not in the White House, I'm sorry, but it looked really ridiculous when there was a lot of talk about democracy, but unfortunately we didn't see, like, the elections of 1998, 96 was a shame, but not the attempt to follow the principles. And yes, speaking about Putin's very unique approach, or not in one sense, it's a very typical approach to Ukraine, but also somehow unique. First, I found the source of his knowledge, everything about Stepan Bandera, and it's really interesting because definitely he first time he learned that name from his favorite writer Yulian Semyonov, the most famous novelist in Soviet Union, who used to write spy novels about Maxim Isaev, who was spying on the Third Reich, and his name is in disguise was Stirlitz, the most beloved character of the most popular Russian TV series 17 Moments of Spring. But Yulian Semyonov, the author, the father of Stirlitz, had a series of these novels, and the next novel, published right after the 17 Moments of Spring, was called The Third Card. And we know that Vladimir Putin loved 17 Moments of Spring. And in several interviews, he confessed that he decided to go to work for KGB because he really wanted to be a spy like Stirlitz. So the next novel tells the story of the fight against Stirlitz and Bandera. Bandera was the biggest villain in that novel, and Putin read it as a young man. And if we compare the current propagandist narrative about Bandera, it exactly fits. It doesn't resemble. It's the same as if it was taken from Semyonov's fiction. And yes, also for many years we didn't know quite a lot why Crimea has become that dear to Vladimir Putin, because we understand that there was no popular demand. Crimea has never been considered by the majority of Russians as the cradle of sacred place, cradle of Russian civilization. It's not like Kosovo for Serbia. It was a popular summer resort, but for some people it was something very sacred, connected to the memory of the Crimean War of the 19th century. But Yuri Lushkov, who was considered to be the popular politician in the 90s, former mayor of Moscow, was frequently ridiculed for his when he was trying to express the idea of taking Crimea back to Russia. So he was not popular because of that. On the contrary, that was his PR disadvantage, because it sounded ridiculous. But everything changes if we know that who were the fathers of Putin's closest friends in 90s when he came back from Germany, and he started working there, and his most dear friends since then were Kovalchuk brothers and Fursenko brothers, and their fathers were very important Soviet historians, both academicians, and the specialization of Kovalchuk the senior was history of Crimea and Sebastopol, and so probably, definitely, that person was very important moral authority for young Vladimir Putin, and we know the source of his inspiration, and it's also remarkable that the specialization of academician Fursenko the senior was the history of the United States. So he has written several books about the conspiracy of CIA against the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I mean, this is all extremely fascinating, and as someone who has a PhD in history, it's also extraordinarily interesting to sort of think about the role of the self-directed historian in the case of Vladimir Putin and those kind of influences, because he speaks himself all the time about how history was his passion as a younger person, but there's not much evidence they actually took any formal history courses, and of course that gets into all of the debates about, again, who has the right to write history, how do we all interpret history in our own lives. We're all data points as individuals in a historical period. And what shapes very much one's historical viewpoint? Is it official history, as is read in history books or in classes, or is it in popular culture? As you're saying, the Semyonov's novels and the kind of shaping of views of Stepan Bandera, or Putin sitting around with the Fosenkos and the Kovalchuks, or reading their books, or listening to their interpretations, which gets us right back to you writing this book, and also setting off a whole set of other discussions and thinking right from the very beginning about how Innocenty, as the priest originally from Königsberg, moving to Kiev, starts to think about his own kind of version of history. Growing up in northern England, the Vikings got a terrible rap because it was all of the monks, who got raided by Vikings who were writing the histories. And then, we were actually in northern England. We had Danelaw. Maybe it was a very different perspective from what we get in the chronicles. Every time you have to kind of think about who is the person writing that history, and I really love the first person approach to this, and the way you think about it in real time about what is motivating, someone to write history.
I was really stricken when I had a book tour in Britain, and I was in Edinburgh presenting this book, and together with my daughter, I decided to show her a movie about history of Scotland, and definitely I chose Braveheart.
Braveheart, of course.
Yes, and
such an accurate movie.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, but then I realized that that's the story of Ivan Mazepa.
Yeah.
That obviously Robert Bruce,
Yeah.
not William Wallace. Robert Bruce is exactly Ivan Mazepa, who used to be very loyal to the English throne. Then realized that it was not right to his people, and he switched sides and he started fighting against the English king, and he's not by English people today. He's not considered to be a traitor forever. So it's really remarkable how different nations deal with their historical traumas, because nothing changed with Mazepa. Mazepa till now is that's the curse for any Russian, probably because of Alexander Pushkin, probably because of Poltava, but it's remarkable how people do not change their perception of the historical characters.
Yeah, and I mean that's obviously the role of historians, is constantly interpreting and reinterpreting the same sets of events. I mean, how many books have been written about the Russian Revolution, the French Revolution? There's constantly something new to say from a different perspective. And I think that's, what's so important about this book, is you're casting a different perspective on all of these stories. As you say, some are myths, some in fact, as you get into the depths of them, there may be new information to discover about them. But I'd like to bring in others from the audience here. I see a lot of people here who have themselves written many different versions, and I'll start with Daniil here and try to get to everyone. We have until 12:30 or so, so we've got a good, I can't see my own watch here, a good half hour of questions and things as well. And please, if everyone could identify themselves, and we'll get questions for Mikhail.
Oh yeah,
Works.
Works. Danila Galperovich, Voice of America. Thank you very much. Misha, thank you very much for being here, for presenting your book. Fiona, thank you very much. Wonderful conversation. I have a question. Before that question, I need to give you a quote from one guy about 20 years ago. It will be short, I promise. It was the political choice of the Russian people that allowed them, the leadership of the Soviet Union, to make decisions that ultimately led to demolition of the Berlin Wall. It is the choice that had expanded the boundaries of European humanism many times over and allows us to assert that no one will ever be able to turn Russia back into the past. As for European integration, we not only support these processes, we look at them with hope.
Stop.
We,
I remember
exactly.
this quote.
It's not only, it was, so actually the sweet one was the last sentence about the destructiveness of occupation ideology.
Yeah.
So yes, it was Vladimir Putin in 2001 in Bundestag speaking in German to German parliament. So do you think that he used the imperial ideology just to preserve power and to use it and used it as a painkiller, or rather as a drug for Russian, or he became a true new believer in all of this? So cynicism or delusion? Thank you.
And just, adding to that, you did say again, and, perhaps we didn't press it enough, that you saw some pivotal points, and you mentioned 2012, for example, when he comes back again into the presidency. So, based on what Daniela said there, is there some pivotal points, some change, or is it, just the cynicism?
Yeah, I think both. And I think there are several pivotal points. For example, 2004, the Orange Revolution in Ukraine was another turning point for him, because yes, that was probably one of the starting points of his paranoia. That was the point when he was persuaded by the spin doctors, by Russian spin doctors working in Ukraine, that the catastrophe in Ukraine, that the defeat of candidate Yanukovych was not their failure and was not his failure. And it happened not because they stole all the money allocated to that campaign, but because Americans paid much more. And it was the result of the American conspiracy, and he preferred to believe it. So yes, he had some kind of transformation. And if you ask me if he believes that he was wrong in Bundestag in 2001, right now, yes, I think he changed his mind. He started believing in that imperial ideology much more than he used to believe. But at the same time, is there a cynical approach? Yes, it was very cynical. Yes, when he fired Surkov in 2012, that was because Surkov was trying to persuade him that middle class is his power base, that he needs to think about the middle class first, and that's the future bourgeoisie of Russia. And then he saw that those people betrayed him. They were protesting massively against his comeback, and yes, it was part of the strategy to change the rhetorics, to address those people who want to see Russia great again. So I think it's both. Russia is a very cynical country, unfortunately.
Yes. Okay.
Hello, I'm Elena Davlikanova, Ukrainian Democracy Fellow with the Center for European Policy Analysis. Thank you for this book. I read it and found it very interesting, very informative, and very important for the launch of very needed discussion in Russia of what Russia is, what Russian people are, and very important for transitional justice that we all hope for, which only will be the basis for first very deep internal changes in Russia for democratization, important for democratization, and for reconciliation with all the people that were oppressed by Russia, and also for coming back to the West. But my question to you is as follows. Recently, I've heard a statement of one Russian intellectual that all those messages that great Russia idea should be debunked, that Russia is bad, like talking about its wrongdoings, it only makes Russian people aggressive against, those who are talking about this and against the West. So my question, do you think this is not the right time to talk about it? And the second question, who do you think your ideas will fly with in Russian society? Because as you said, some people in Russia use the great Russia myth as a painkiller, and the others are trying to use it as a framework to preserve their well-being. So who are your audience? Who would support what you have expressed? Thank you.
I think this is a very important question with another addition as well. I mean, I know you've had some exchanges with people since the book on this topic about the sort of non-ethnic Russian minorities as well. I mean, Russia nominally is 80% ethnic Russian, but actually that's just nominally because so many people are of mixed heritage and probably would have a hard time, unpacking the multiple identities. I mean, you mentioned the Tatars, for example. There's the whole North Caucasus with a whole myriad of, different ethnic groups and others there. And I mean, Putin himself has said, a Russian is a kind of a great Russian, somebody who accepts Russian civilization and speaks Russian, but doesn't necessarily have to be ethnically Russian. So this is part of that kind of complexity of how you even talk about who is a Russian, what is a Russian, and basically trying to open that debate on a broader scale.
I don't think that there should be right time to start the conversation or wrong time to start the conversation. I think it should have been started many years ago, and we need to start it now if we didn't do that, if we hadn't done that before. And yes, but there is a suspicion and there is a problem that Russian people are becoming much more anti-Western, anti-American than they used to be. But I think that's a separate issue. That's not because we are trying to start thinking about Russian history, and we need to address that issue as well. And I think it's not because of works about Russian history. It's connected to what is happening right now. And I think the conversation with Russian society, even with Russians who stay in the country, is still needed. I think if we're watching what's happening with Russian society, we see that there was a change. Right, it happened during the last year. I remember, and you do probably, that in the first months of the war, a lot of people were shocked. A lot of people were expecting the war to be an inevitable catastrophe for Putin's regime, for the state, for Russian economy. Everyone was expecting Russian economy to collapse, and that didn't happen. That didn't happen due to several reasons. Unfortunately, a lot of people who were willing to leave Russia, to go to the West and to take their kids and their businesses and to support Ukraine could not do that due to obvious reasons, due to their bank accounts were closed. A lot of people came back to Russia because Russia is the only place where they can have business. So that, I think that was rather a mistake, although I understand why it happened, but I think it was easier for many governments for the West, but probably there was harder, more complicated, but more helpful variant of policy towards Russian society, but still it's there. We see that Russia is not isolated. We see that it's isolated only from the West, and Russians are traveling to Dubai or to Bali, to Asia, Africa, Latin America, and so Russia is not closed. And yes, unfortunately, that feeling that 100% of Russians were pro-European and pro-Western, it's still kind of the same, but it's changing a bit. And I think we should think of it, and I'm thinking of it on a daily basis. Besides to this book, I have my own YouTube channel, and I'm trying to talk to the Western intellectuals, to the Western artists, historians, politicians, just to keep that dialogue, just to give Russian society the possibility to hear the voices from the West addressed to the Russian community, to the Russian society, just to let them know that they are not forgotten, that the Western thinkers do not associate the whole population of Russia with Putin. They do not equalize the whole Russia with Putin, and that kind of conversation is needed because there is Russia after Putin. He's going to die one day. And we know that the regime is going to change one day, and probably there are people in Russia who should be considered like the hope of that country, who we should rely on, and we must not forget about them. We must not work with them, and they need it. So, and they are the audience of my book. They are the audience of all the independent media in exile. And we have that statistics. We know that TV Rain and Medusa have a lot of readership and viewership in Russia. I have the same statistics about my media project. We know that at least up to 20 million people there are ready to torture themselves on a daily basis, because it's really hard psychologically to live in Russia and to make yourself follow all those news. It's easier psychologically to just to not to open it, not just to focus on something different, and to continue living in very comfortable Moscow. In Moscow that, according to Muscovites, has never been richer. Like all the restaurants are fully packed with people. And it seems like life goes on. But still, we have 20 million people watching and reading and following. And it's hard. I guess that if the population of the Nazi Germany had the possibility to read news about concentration camps on a daily basis, I don't know how many would choose to read it. We know that sometimes it's another choice. Just not a lot of people didn't see the smoke. They didn't ask themselves, where are the Jews? So there is a moral dilemma for a lot of people, and we know that for many people they have the clear answer. So at least they are the audience, and it's possible to enlarge that group of people.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions coming up now, I guess, about this. And I know that there'll be some questions about the impact that exiles can actually have as well. In fact, I mean, I see Greg Pfeiffer there. I'll ask to come in, because you've been doing a project related to this as well. Because I think that's what's on everyone's minds is how, and it's what you're asking, I mean, how do we know, or how can we expect this will have an impact? Anyway, great. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Fiona, and thanks to both of you for a terrific conversation and a terrific book, Mikhail. I think not only your explication of many of Russia's creation myths, but also contextualizing, telling us what's going on in other parts of the world at the same time, really sort of makes this understandable to a Western audience. You mentioned that in 1991, Lenin was blamed, Stalin was blamed, but not previous leaders. And I would say sort of more than that, Tsarist history was embraced as the point to go back to and pick up from, and I think not only in Russia, in the West very much as well. And I think this goes back to, Fiona, what you said about Putin being a sort of a product, a student of the 1990s, very observant of the time. Now, of course, Tsarist history is being taken very seriously, probably as seriously as ever since 1991. Thank goodness. But do you have any concerns that possibly by looking at history so closely, and maybe exclusively in some cases, because there have been other books about Russian history that have come out in the past year, that we run the danger of making teleological arguments, that is, going back and looking at this or that development in Russia's imperial history as an explanation for why this kind of stuff is going on, inevitably, perhaps even today. And in looking to the future of Russia, might there be a danger of ignoring the sort of practical reasons behind the decisions that, for example, Putin makes? He's very, very good at looking at Tsarist and Soviet symbolism and rhetoric and using them for his own aims. But these aims are very much have to do with his power and influence and wealth in the present day, which also gets back to Danila's question. Thank you.
Yes, but we're not, I hope, we are not trying to use history to explain and to justify what is happening right now, as they do. And we understand that it's always wrong. It's always wrong to use historical examples and historical scenarios to explain the reality. And yes, it's clear that those historical examples are not helpful to explain what is happening. I'm sure we all understand that Russia is not doomed or predetermined to be dictatorship forever, and as it's not doomed to be anything else, because we've got the proof, like North and South Korea, that there are no national characters. But at the same time, historical mythology sometimes can be helpful, and we see that, for example, in Ukraine, where the historical myth of Zaporizhian host was used as the cornerstone of the education of national history since 1991, and the ideas of military democracy that existed in Zaporizhian host, I think was crucial for Ukrainian society today. And what we see in Ukraine is somehow the influence of their vision of the mission of their society, and it is based on their perception of their history. At the same time, we have seen that Putin was using the imperial example as the basis for his policy, and that historical myth led a lot of people to believing in his propaganda. And it's really funny that they keep on telling that Russia has always fought against the West in all the wars, and I wait when they're going to start telling that Russia was fighting against Britain and France and the United States in all world wars. I think it will happen.
Yeah, well, those distortions of history very much. There's a lady over here. Yep.
First of all, thank you so much. Tina Dolbaya, CSIS. I completely agree what you have said, that every country, whether it's like a global power or minor power, they have committed maybe some crimes that they're not comfortable discussing. And you have mentioned Germany, and you have mentioned some troubles in the 50s and 60s when maybe some part of the population, they found it difficult to reconcile with the fact that their former leadership committed these terrible crimes. And my question is based on this. Do you think that there was ever a conversation in Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union, maybe in the 90s or early 2000s, that, Russia was an occupying power, and then Russia did this terrible thing by occupying other countries, not just as an imperial Russia, but also like Russia within the Soviet Union occupied other countries as well? Was there like any conversation regarding this in like early, late 90s or 2000s among Russian civil society when it was more vibrant than it is now, unfortunately? Or do you think such conversations should begin after, basically in post-Putin Russia, for Russia to reconcile not just with Ukraine, but also with other post-Soviet countries, basically in the region. Thank you.
I mean, that's an important question. If we look back to the late 80s, of course, with Gorbachev, with starting with Glasnost and the dark parts of history, trying to work with the Poles, for example, at different points, looking at the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Yeltsin continues that for a short period. I talked before about this Satarov group that was set up with a new Russian idea, and then, in a way, it seems to become too much politically. And of course, there's then, I would say probably that Putin engages in a backlash against that kind of open debate, and we can talk about what probably motivated that. But is there a way of building on, I guess, those discussions of the past, or does it become basically repudiated because of Gorbachev and seen to have lost the Soviet Union, the kind of like the backlash there of the sort of the loss of the state? I mean, what do you think really here is the kind of the reason for losing that thread of the earlier, more critical historical debate? It certainly didn't go as far as some would have wanted it to be, but how feasible is it, I guess, to go back to this again?
I guess it's very clear why that conversation was not popular and why it was considered to be painful. Exactly what you said. It was the consequence of the collapse of Soviet Union, and there was a threat of the same fragmentation of Russia. So since the beginning of the war in Chechnya, it was clear that it was like everyone knew that continuing that conversation, that very historical moment would open Pandora box and would lead all other national republics to continue the conversation about their independence. And actually, there was such a conversation in almost every national republic, in Tatarstan, in Bashkortostan. And that's why it was not so popular in Moscow. That's why it was cultural elite in Russia felt that it's too dangerous to continue with that conversation. And I think that the aggression against Ukraine made that conversation inevitable, because now it's so clear that trying to avoid that conversation leads us to the war crimes. And so I think now it's much easier it's not easy, but for many people it looks like the inevitable final of that long-term silence.
Yeah. Toby. Yep.
Thank you, Toby Gotti, former Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director, like Fiona was for Russia and Eurasia. Mikhail, thank you for all your work and what you've done. What I'd like to say is what you're doing is not just historical, because today it has real-life importance. Russia's curriculum for its entire educational system has changed to reflect every one of the ideas that, I haven't read your book, but I imagine that you would not support that new curriculum. Militarization, land is very important, not talking about Soviet crimes. So my question to you is there any effort to oppose this curriculum? For example, something that would be very important would be a teaching civics curriculum on your TV station or on your internet or whatever, so that people could, in effect, know what they're being taught. There is a counter to it, and there is something that it's not just about land, not about Putin, but it's also about good laws and institutions and that kind of thing that Russia lacks. So my long-term view is on your side that this curriculum will be put on the bookshelf next to Stalin's History of the Communist Party, and we'll all say, wasn't that quaint? But at the current time, it has a real impact on hundreds of thousands of children. So what do we do about a new generation of children who aren't going to read a book like this, but might be able to, on the internet, have a series of discussions about what it means to build civics, to really have a society that has good laws and rules rather than just rules and laws, and has institutions. So that's my question to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and I've got two parts of the answer. First, I'm trying to get the information from the ground. I recently had several conversations with groups of history teachers in different regions of Russia. So I'm trying. I've heard a lot of stories how they are trying to avoid teaching Medinsky, and how the students react to that. And I've heard several stories that, yeah, obviously children understand everything, and we're trying to discuss everything, but still they need to know what's written in Medinsky's textbook, even though we hate it, but we still have to use it because they have their final exams.
Right.
And when they have to pass YEGE, they will have to answer questions from Medinsky's textbook. And unfortunately, history is not the only part. The whole way of how the school looks like is very different from how it looked like 2 years ago. Now it may not seem that shocking for an American audience, but for Russian audience, it sounds shocking that they have to raise the flag. And it has never been like that. And they have to have conversations about important. And that's an obligatory discipline, and like and in each school there is a new person. It's called advisor on. I forgot.
So basically, like a political commissar.
Yes, it's a commissar. It's a commissar who is not a teacher, but who is entitled to watch the ideology, and he's watching not only the students, he's watching the teachers, and he's asking the students to report if teachers says something wrong. So it
sounds a bit like parts of the United States at the moment. But, yeah, sadly.
But at the same time, yes, I do. And talking to those teachers, and having written this book, I realized that now even if I didn't want it before, I didn't plan it before, but now I have the obligation to write some kind of history textbook, and that is my mission and my obligation, and I will have to do that. I've started. I have started that work, and I hope that it will be. I know that it will be needed for at least for those kids who now live in Russian-speaking families outside of Russia, and more than 1 million people have left, and their kids are not going to teach Russian history at all. But I know that kids in Russia also need that. So I'm not only starting this conversation. I see the clear necessity to continue that job.
I think that's a very important point, especially sitting here in the National Endowment for Democracy and more broadly. I mean, for many countries, having a kind of an independent history project with lectures that can go online. I mean, we've got people like Tim Snyder doing this, kind of on a regular basis. You can get a whole collection of some of the best historians, globally, to put lectures in English and in Russian and many other contexts. I mean, this could be something that's actually not particularly high cost to get that out there. Germany, actually, I mean, both of us spent a long time in Germany over this past year. The German government in their interior ministry is actually putting out textbooks to actually counteract some problems inside of Germany itself on civics and on history, trying to find a kind of a neutral level as well, and using YouTube and others to get more access. So this obviously seems like a very good project that hopefully people in the audience here will support you in, and kind of lend their efforts as well. There was a lady towards the back here who had her hand up, and I'm sorry that I keep missing everyone. Had it up for a while here.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mikhail, for starting this important conversation. My name is Katerina Shankaruk. I am an international relations lecturer here at the Bush School of Government Public Service in DC. And my question is actually about Ukraine and Ukraine's invasion that you basically refer to as a conversation about dismantling imperialist mindset. And I'm wondering to what degree this is only a part of the problem, given that in Ukraine's case it is a unique combination of both imperialist mindset but also national claims, basically ethnic claims. One of the mottos of the invasion is denazifying Ukraine, basically denying Ukraine right to its even ethnicity. Another indicator for that is when Putin in Valdai was referring to Odessa not as Российский but as Русский город, meaning like this is part of the national project. So while this is a big separate conversation, I wonder to what degree you see this effort on basically building a Russian political nation separately from Ukraine as part of an imperialist deconstruction or a whole different effort, maybe nation-building effort. Thank you.
This is actually a vital question in a European context as well, because certainly in discussions that we were in Germany, this is the whole issue of European history writ large. Because you mentioned before Serbia and Kosovo, for example, but we could take any European country and have the same debate. Britain used to lay claim to, or English kings and queens used to lay claim to the French throne. Calais was seen as an English city, not as a French city. For example, we could go around Europe looking at the same issues. You mentioned in the book, of course, Königsberg, which is now Kaliningrad, and there's a great deal of anxiety in Europe about where this leads as well. About will there be, particularly when we look at Spain now, with the deal that has just had to be made by Sanchez to forge a government with Catalan separatists, about where we're heading on this issue. This is, Spain was an empire as well, but it's also that kind of contiguity of territory and a question of language. You write in the book, which gets to your question here about language again, is Ukrainian a language? Is it a different ethnicity? Is there there be a place-based sense of national identity as well? So this question gets to the heart, I think, of all the debates that are going on in Europe now as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. How do you exactly see this as unfolding? It's not just about empire, but it is about what makes a nation, what makes a country, how important is language, how important is the identity of place based on history and kind of shared life experiences.
It's a very peculiar history of that dilemma in Russia itself, because we remember when in Soviet Union the conversation about Russians and the role of Russians in the World War II was started. It was the toast of Joseph Stalin in Kremlin in summer 1945, when he proclaimed the toast for the Russian people who brought the victory. So, and that is exactly the ideology that was born in late Stalin's period, and actually late Stalinism looks like Putinism ideologically quite a lot. But I spent several days trying to check whether this message is important for Russian propaganda, because obviously we remember that the war started with that very nationalistic pattern, and it was started with the word denazification, and early in April last year, the notorious article written by Timofey Sergeytsev turned up in RIA Novosti about the Ukrainization of Ukraine. And he wrote that the word Ukraine should not exist because it's misleading. There are Russian people living there, and they were brainwashed. And that's why they mistakenly consider themselves to be Ukrainians. We should erase this word and erase their memories about Ukrainian language. And I was trying to check how popular that message and that narrative was in Russian propaganda. And it's easy to check, for example, because there is Vladimir Solovyov. And he's got such a huge corpus of all the worst bullshit that is supported and that is created by Russian propaganda. So you can find anything, and you can track what's becoming more popular and what's becoming less popular. And on a daily basis, he was posting the official press release by Russian Ministry of Defense of number of casualties on the front line. And every day, the final sentence of that report posted by Solovyov was, "The denazification of Ukraine is inevitable!" Exclamation mark. So he posted that sentence every day, and in September he stopped. And then it was like, it has gone. And we know that that there were some kind of surveys conducted by Kremlin whether the denazification idea is understood by the society, and if it's popular. And they found out that the majority of people just don't get it. The most notorious case happened in city of Dalnigorsk, if I'm not sure. It's if I'm not wrong, it's Far East, where the mayor was delivering a speech during the rally, and he was trying to say the word denazification, and he could not for the second time, for the third time, for the fourth time. Then he managed to do that, but said denazification of Russia. He became so nervous, so he said denazification of Russia, and then after that he was trying to find the journalist who filmed him and who posted that video and to send him to the army. So it was so that idea is that message has been erased from the propagandist discourse. And if we listen to Russian propaganda now, they have completely changed the idea. They are now fighting not with Ukraine and not for denazification of Ukraine, but they are fighting against the West. It's like it's everything about the NATO and Americans, and Ukrainians are just, they should be punished because they are traitors. That's the myth of Mazepa. They are using this pattern. They are not speaking about Ukrainians who must be saved. No. They must be punished because they are collaborators with the West. It's different. So they recognize now the right of Ukraine to exist, but in a slightly different way.
Yeah. Do we have time for a few more questions? I think there's a gentleman here. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Camilo Enriquez. I'm from Colombia. Thanks for the interventions and the book. It seems really interesting. It's a really quick question. There has been intervention, maybe imperialist intervention from Russia in Latin America, specifically in Cuba. I want to know, from your opinion and your knowledge and your research, what is the interest during these times of Russia in Latin America?
Right now, you mean?
And for the future.
Yeah.
I think there is a difference between Russia today and the Soviet Union in terms of how they deal with the world. Because, for example, I'll start with personal stories. Let's have a look at Mikhail Andreevich Suslov and Vladimir Medinsky. Suslov used to be the chief ideologist of the Soviet Union, and Medinsky is pretending that he is the ideologist of Russia today. And there is very clear difference between two of them. Suslov didn't have a yacht, and he never wanted to. And he was a terrible person, but he was in a way sincere, and he was a true Bolshevik, and he believed in the world revolution, and he believed in some terrible ideas he was really fighting for. So yes, Soviet Union really tried to control and to have allies, to have a lot of countries under their control. They invested a lot of money in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, just to be sure that they spread the influence. And I think that's the difference between Soviet Union and Russia today, because because they are not those idealistic as Soviet bureaucrats used to be. They prefer to earn money than to spend money. What have we seen in Africa, for example? Prigozhin was not building something; he was earning money. The famous African joke about Americans and Chinese, that when Americans come to Africa, they organize a conference. When Chinese come to Africa, they build an airport. But when Russians were coming to Africa, they wanted money for their service. If the local bureaucrat, if the local dictator, if the local warlord needed their army, they were there to help, to earn money. They are not trying to control nations. They are not trying to control countries. They are trying to use them to earn money. So I'm not sure that the strategy in Latin America is to control anything. It's much more something like a show off. Yes, Putin, and probably Putin has that. That's probably the only lesson he learned from Hugo Chavez, that he doesn't have to be shy trying to become the leader of anti-Americanist world. He didn't want that when Chavez was trying to portray himself as the anti-Americanist number one. Putin was very shy. I have that joke in my book when I compare the infamous Putin's Munich speech to the monologue of Hugh Grant in Love Actually. So yes, obviously that time in 2005, 2006, 2007, when that movie it was a Christmas comedy, British Christmas comedy, but it was clear that such an anti-Americanist speech delivered by a British Prime Minister would be very popular with the audience, because after Iraq, in many countries of the world, it was fun, but Putin's anti-Americanism was very Hugh Grant style. He was not trying to be Hugo Chavez. He was trying to be Hugh Grant, and now he's trying to be Hugo Chavez. Now he has learned how to be. That he needs to be real anti-Americanism. Before that, he wanted to make friends with some Europeans, and he was trying to divide and rule. Now he understands that part of the world is lost, and he is fighting for the popularity in the global south, and that's his idea.
I'm not really quite sure where to go with Hugo Chavez and Hugh Grant in my mind at the same time. They're not two people that I, normally would think about in the same sentence. But you've somehow managed to do that, which is really quite remarkable. I think we have time for just one more question. I can see Damon making some moves out there, but there was a lady here who had her hand up for quite some time, and then I think we're supposed to move off to have discussion over lunch. Is that right? It's this lady here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Maria Blackwood from the Congressional Research Service. I'll be very brief. How do you see these dynamics in relation to the non-Slavic parts of the former Soviet Union, particularly Central Asia and the South Caucasus?
Every time I'm speaking to people from Kazakhstan, they are asking me if they are in danger. Yeah. And I have to answer them yes, because that's clear. Because we understand that Putin needs war. That's the key factor of his power and his if he thinks about political stability, in his version of stability, he needs war. So basically, northern Kazakhstan is in danger. We understand that there is Russian television there. There is Russian-speaking minority. There are huge differences between Russian-speaking minority of Kazakhstan and the new wave of Russian immigrants who are coming from Russia because the new wave of Russians who are not citizens of Kazakhstan, they don't like Putin, and the Russian Kazakhstanis, they like Putin, and there are a lot of issues there. So I think there is a potential that the internal differences between Russian-speaking Kazakhstani population and the rest of the country would be used by Putin, and that potential threat exists. I think that's the most important part about that region. I don't see any potential of any political invasion of Russia, but Russian people are becoming more visible in that region because, for example, Uzbekistan has become one of the most important tourist destinations for Russians last year, and it was discovered with a lot of people who cannot travel to Europe now are now traveling to Bukhara and Samarkand. So, and yeah, it's becoming visible for the first time because for 30 years, Central Asia was neglected, was forgotten by Russia and by Russians, and now it has been discovered. And I think that's also the source of potential threat, danger.
That's a bit of an ominous point to stop on, the sort of hordes of tourists changing the dynamic of region. But I mean, I think what we're hearing now is obviously plenty of reason for really following even further and more closely some of the dynamics that have been supercharged by recent events. As you're pointing out, the new Russian speakers, ethnic Russians who have fled Putin's regime and are living elsewhere, changing the dynamics on the ground, whole different perspectives of people discovering other places for the first time, but in a new light. And I think certainly coming out of the debate today, I'm taking away very much the importance of the continued inquiry and also the work that you're doing now on perhaps opening up new venues of studying history through your YouTube and other venues that you're thinking about here. I mean, personally, and I'm sure I saw a lot of nodding people here in the audience, I think you might have a lot of willing people here who would like to assist you in this project. It's also important on a comparative perspective from our own situation here in the United States. As I mean, we're in the middle of a debate about how history should be taught here too, as in many countries as well. So a comparative perspective, you may be, forging a path that many of us might have to follow in other contexts as well. But Mikhail, this is a really great book. It's a very good read. It's for those of you who haven't read it yet. It zips along because of your approach. There'll be, I think sections of this that people might disagree with. This is inevitably the case, but that makes for even more of a good discussion. And I know that you've been engaged in real time with people who have taken issue with some points in the book and moving it forward, which I think is a sort of fantastic approach. This is actually a living book, And I know that you're continuing to work on this.
That's true.
So on just behalf of myself and your other fans here in the audience and National Endowment for Democracy, thank you for doing this. And I hope we can support you in all the things that you're starting to do next. So thank you.
Fiona, thank you. I think National Endowment for Democracy. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. And I believe there's lunch next, is that correct? Yeah. Damon's already started, so great job, thank you.